you're jumping through and adapting to working and being with each other in this new format. This is a Zoom webinar. Some of you might be painfully familiar. For others, it might be kind of clunky. So let me just explain. CCC members are panelists, which means that you're here, your tile's on the screen with the ability to turn on your video. And if you can turn on your video, we love it if you do. It feels much more like meeting in person together. And the start video is if you go down to the lower left corner of your screen, you can turn your video on there if you have the ability. We ask that everybody keep yourselves on mute when you're not speaking, just to avoid background noise. That's the little microphone button in the lower left corner. And then members of the public and other interested folks who are not CCC members, you are attendees. And so that means you can see and hear everything. You cannot turn on video. And when you'd like to speak during the comment period, you can raise your hand, that little yellow raise hand button at the bottom of your screen. And that'll let us know that you want to speak. And we will then at the time turn on your ability to speak, and you'll unmute yourself at that point. But other than that, you won't be able to turn your volume on and off. Let me see if there's anything else I should mention. There is a Q&A function that you can use to pose questions if you'd like to, and we will try to get to those if we can. And we will be turning on recording for this webinar shortly, and the recording will be provided to CTSB to make publicly available. And we also have closed captioning, which is an automated thing, so it's not perfect, but if that could be helpful to you, towards the right side of that menu bar at the bottom, there's a closed caption button, and you can turn it on there. Pat, anything else that would be helpful to review with folks?
I think that's it. If for some reason we missed anybody who's an attendee and also is a CCC member, we would elevate you into the kind of the table of the CCC. So if we missed you and you are a CCC member, just put your raised hand up and we'll know to kind of move you into the CCC, and that's for CCC members. Let me just describe how we'll handle tonight's meeting a little bit. We'll hand over. So like a CCC meeting, we have our table, only it's this weird two-dimensional Zoom thing. And our primary conversation for much of the night, but not all the night, will be with the agencies and the CCC members. And I will have a quick review of the agenda. We'll have some updated permit, which Brian will go through with Dean. We'll talk a little bit about where to from here with the CCC, brief site update for other activities. And then we'll really have time for public comment. And given that we have a number of attendees, we will make sure there's time for people who want to raise a question or make a comment to be able to do that too around 7:40, 7:45. And we'll do that. I think we're also welcome when we're having a conversation. If you have a question in mind and you want to not forget it and just want to put it in the Q&A, that's fine. If we don't get to it in the CCC conversation, we'll try to get to it during the public comment period. And then CCC members, as we go through this, if you have a question or comment, just do raise your hand function. I can see most everybody, so if you wave your hand, I can probably see you. I think I've got everybody's video on, but it's better to use the raise hand function just so I don't miss you, or you can just put in chat, hey, Pat, I want to say something, and I'll see it that way as well. All right, great. So with that, again, I think we appreciate people gathering tonight in this strange new world that we've now been all in for, like, it feels like now, too normal. We appreciate people gathering tonight. We really want to kind of hear where things are with an update of the permit. Brian's going to go through that, here to answer questions as well. And that'll be probably about an hour of our time. And then we'll talk a little bit about, kind of where to from here as we go forward and move into these next phases of the cleanup and of the CCC, what that might mean. And then we'll go from there. Okay, so I guess I'm going to hand this over to Brian and Dean. And I'll let you guys kind of run with the presentation for a bit. And then after that, we'll take CCC questions and comments.
I'm going to turn it over to Dean. He's going to start.
Great.
Sure. I'll just go over a couple things, then we'll go back to Tim to talk about the status of the permit. So I'm going to try and share my screen, if that's ready for that, Elizabeth. And if you can let me know if you can see the FAQ, the frequently asked questions.
We can. Good.
Okay. So I just want to spend about 10 minutes explaining why EPA sent this fact sheet out yesterday. Kelsey and our team, we've received a lot of calls since we've issued the permit and the response to comment. And clearly there's some questions that persist and are ongoing. And we feel we responded to the questions and the comments on the permit in our response to comments document, but obviously that's a little thick and not exactly user friendly, if that's the right term. So we sent out, based on not all the comments, but a lot of the comments were on the upland disposal facility. So without putting new information, we tried to extract from the response to comments and maybe give a little more concise answer to some questions. So I think all of you have received this. I'm not going to read it to you word for word since you do have it, but I do just want to go over a couple of the key ones, probably the most asked questions. So the first one that we've had a lot of questions on is, what are the levels of PCBs allowed in the upland disposal facility? The accurate answer to that is it's Appendix E to the permit sets forth the requirements and the limitations. So really that's where the rules are. That is the same, that is in the permit, in the final permit in December 2020. It's the same as Appendix C to the February 2020 settlement agreement. So nothing has changed. It's 3 pages long, so it's not overly long, but there are some not unique features, but it's just not a very simple answer as to what goes in there. But overall, the average concentration after all material is placed in the UDF has to average less than 50 parts per million. And I really encourage everyone to look at attachment E. It's only 3 pages long. So if I misspeak or I incorrectly summarize it, it's attachment E that's going to govern this. So overall, it has to be less than 50 parts per million. For floodplain soil, there's 90 separate areas that EPA has set up. Each individual area that needs to have soil removed, that soil, only soil less than 50 parts per million on average, again, can go into the UDF. So that's floodplain soil. For most of the sediment areas, such as the 5 Mile area in Pittsfield, that's one area, Woods Pond is another, the average concentration for that area, for that individual area, for Woods Pond, has to be less than 25 parts per million. So it's different for the vast majority of the sediment areas than it is for the floodplain soil. And then one other point, or 2 other points. So these are averages. Obviously, you can be above and below an average and still be below 25 ppm with an individual sample. So the question was, how do you ensure or try to limit hotspots from being able to be placed into the UDF? In Appendix E, there's a requirement that any area represented by a sample, it's called a vertical profile or vertical core sample, those individual areas have to average less than 100 parts per million. So if there's an individual area represented by a vertical core that's over 100 parts per million, even if the overall concentration of sediment in Woods Pond, for example, is less than 25, that hotspot cannot go into the UDF. So there's 2 criteria for the sediment. Overall average less than 25, and then nothing above 100. So how did EPA come up with this 20 to 25 that you've heard in public meetings? Well, that's based on applying the criteria in Appendix E to all the current, I'll be redundant, current existing data. And when we looked at the current data and applied the criteria in Appendix E, the average was between 20 and 25 parts per million. Now that could change going forward with the actual data. Appendix E outlines a very extensive additional sampling requirements. But kind of the way I look at it in general, the majority of the waste is sediment. Say 80% is sediment and maybe 20% is floodplain soil. This is an example. This is not fact. This is not in the permit. But in general, looking at our volume estimates, I just did a rough average of 80% of sediment at the maximum concentration of 25 ppm and 20% of floodplain at its maximum of 50 ppm. And if you take that average, you'd get 30 parts per million. And again, that's a worst case for each region, each of the 100 floodplain areas. So we think it's going to be between 20 and 25. Could it be a little above 25? Yes. So that's, hopefully that tries to explain a little more on the sampling requirements. I'll show you, this fact sheet has links to the permit at the end of this fact sheet. So I really encourage you to just, draw your own conclusions, read Appendix E, and that's the rules for what's going in the UDF. So just a couple others. I'm sure everybody has had a chance to read these. Another question we've got from numerous property owners is, does the permit require a property owner to abandon its well if it's near the disposal facility? So the answer here is pretty clear. No, it does not. And you can read that on the permit in page 56. What GE has to do is identify all wells located within 500 feet of the disposal area and then offer the opportunity for a landowner to connect to the municipal system. There is no requirement. And if a property owner says no next week and decides 5 years from now, if they're still within that 500-foot range, GE must pay for the cost to connect to the water. I'm just going to quickly show a figure. Hopefully you can see it. This blue area, which is also in your fact sheet, that's the 500-foot radius. So it would only apply, GE has to identify all the wells within that light blue area and offer those property owners to hook up to the wells. So it's only properties well north of Willow Hill Road, south of Woods Pond, and east of the river. So it's a very limited number of parcels. Hopefully that clarifies that issue. Another big concern is on the public water supplies. So again, I'm going to show a drawing why we don't think it's possible for this area here to cause contamination to the Lee water supplies. This figure shows the reservoirs. Leahy is the primary reservoir. It's over 1.1 miles away from the disposal area. Here's the other reservoirs. And these crosshatches are from Mass DEP, I believe, the surface water protection areas. So these are the areas where you want to protect your aquifer. They're all well over a mile away. So that's one issue. The second concern was, can surface runoff from the top of this landfill, if it somehow came in contact with the waste, travel from here all the way to the landfills? We don't see how that's possible. These are topographic lines for elevation, and you can see the blue arrows go perpendicular to that. So that's going to be the direction of surface water flow, perpendicular to your topographic lines. So you can see all the surface flow is away from the reservoir and towards the disposal area. Surface water runoff from the disposal area is going to run in this direction towards the river. So it's not really possible to cross two of these watershed basins, go uphill, and somehow get into the surface water reservoir. So that's surface water runoff. Groundwater is similar, you just can't see topo lines. So there's groundwater elevations. When you measure a well or a surface water, you'll get a groundwater elevation. Similar to surface water, it's going to flow from high areas of groundwater elevation to low. The wells in this area from the landfills and from some borings done by GE and the Housatonic River show the groundwater from the disposal area is going to flow, as it usually does, towards the river. So it's going to go this way from east to west, again, away from the reservoirs. So the groundwater in this area goes from the disposal area towards the river. That's why we don't think there's a risk to the water table, to the drinking water source for the town of Lee. Just a couple other questions that we've gotten a lot on is, can the public review the upland disposal design? And what about the transportation routes? So two things. Yes, EPA is going to make the design available to the public. It's actually embedded in the permit on page 12. So again, this is all, some of this is black and white. So that is right in there. You can go to the permit, look at page 12. It says that EPA is committed to soliciting input from all stakeholders. Have we decided the transportation routes yet? No, that has not been decided, and that's going to come out over the next couple of years when GE does the design. And we have committed in the permit again to discuss the modes of transportation, either rail, truck, hydraulic conveyance, whichever either GE proposes or whatever is discussed, and then EPA will decide how best to approve those plans. And then lastly, I know there's a lot of documents and a lot of links, excuse me. So this fact sheet that we sent out has some of the key ones, the revised permit, and I really encourage people to look at it. There are parts that are complex and maybe over technical, but again, Appendix E, which is the last 3 pages of the permit, talks about the requirements for the UDF, so there's no surprises there. This fact sheet, and here's some of the other links. What we tried to do in the fact sheet, for example, on the drinking water, if you can see this, sorry for moving around. Does GE have to abandon the wells? We say no, and the reference here, permit, page 56. So you can go to page 56 yourself and read the words in the permit yourself and draw your own conclusions as to what's required. So that's why we sent out the fact sheet. Hopefully it's helpful. Hopefully you'll have time to digest it, and maybe it'll clarify some questions.
I think we've got a few questions. So could we take a pause and take some questions, and Reed's first up?
Okay.
Yeah. Hi, can you hear me?
Yep, sound good.
Okay, great, cool. I got a couple questions. I mean, a few things that I felt like I didn't like that I heard was that just that you don't think that there'll be any drainage towards the drinking water. And I understand there's topo maps involved, and there's and you know that you're using what data you have, but I would say that if I lived anywhere near where that drinking water is, and I was given the advice of we don't think this will happen, it wouldn't be good enough because we're talking about drinking water. That's my first comment. The next thing that which is a real question is what kind of monitoring of the drinking water in the wells is GE willing to provide during this time? I mean, I hear that that they can change over to municipal water anytime they want. Great, but if they don't want to, I hear that's the answer GE is willing to provide. What monitoring of that water during the time period, and for what time period, is GE willing to provide? One more question before you answer that one is also, I heard you say the EPA decides, whether it's trucks or rails or how the transportation is taken care of. Why is the town not being asked to weigh in on that? It strikes me that, not that I don't have a very robust trust in the EPA, especially now that Trump's gone. However, I think the people living there should have a say also. And that's that. I'll mute. And if I need to chime in, I'll unmute and I'll.
Sure, I'll do my best to, this is Dean, again, the project manager. I'll do my best to answer that. The question on what will GE be willing to monitor groundwater wells? I'm not going to answer that directly. I'm just going to go by what's in the permit. They're not required to sample people's monitoring wells should they, drinking water wells should they decide not to hook up. I'm not saying they wouldn't do it, but I can't provide affirmation that they would. It's not in the permit. That may
Can
be
we get
something
it
that
in the permit?
the permit is final right now, so no.
Bummer.
I'm not saying that it can't happen, but right now it's not in the permit. So I don't want to promise anything that's not in the permit.
Gotcha.
The second question on input from the town. Yes, we definitely are going to solicit and encourage a lot of input from the town, stakeholders, property owners, anybody on what roads and what method of conveyance. I think the point I was trying to make is just because GE proposes something, EPA does have the final say. And that's just the way all federal permits are. EPA is the regulatory authority. So we will make the decision after taking input from the towns, from the selectmen, from anybody who wants to comment on proposed routes. You know, someone has to be the final decision maker, and the way this project is set up is EPA does have the final call.
Yeah, Dean, one question just in the Q&A from the public. I just want to give, and I think it's related to this. It says, I think you said this, but maybe repeat it. Will modes and routes of transportation be open to public review and comment? So in addition to the town commenting on whatever GE proposes, the public will have a chance to weigh in too? Yeah,
so what EPA has done and what we'll continue to do is for the major documents such as proposed routes of transportation, when GE submits a document that's required under the permit, we'll put it on our website, send out emails, and ask anybody and everybody who wants to comment on it to provide their input. We will have to put a timeline on it because we do have to progress at some point and move forward, but there's no limitation on who can provide input on design documents.
Right. Okay, Dean, I think that we're probably gonna have some more questions as we go, but I know whether Brian's up next maybe, and we can head over to him.
I've got a couple more things I want to talk about. Then
Tim is up next. Dean, can I just follow up on a couple of things you said in Reed's questions? On the monitoring issue, Reed, there are requirements in the permit for GE to do groundwater monitoring around the landfill. I will commit that EPA will make sure if there are wells within 500 feet of this thing, they will be monitored. We will force GE to monitor them through the requirements in the permit that allow just general groundwater monitoring. What we can't do though is force the homeowner to accept that monitoring. So the homeowner may say, GE, I can tell GE to monitor it, but they may refuse to allow access or whatever. That's a separate issue. But I will say that EPA will make GE do the monitoring. If there are wells within 500 feet of this landfill, we'll make sure they're monitored. Second thing on the truck routes, just to be clear, EPA's goal is to do everything we can to not impact the community by moving these trucks. Obviously, there's going to be some impact to the community, but our expectation is that we're going to try and create truck routes that have the least impact. And not only are we going to talk to the town, but as Dean said, we're going to talk to the people who are most impacted by this, the people who live close by, the people who live along potential routes. And frankly, we're going to try and avoid those places if we can. So that hopefully that answers that. And on the water supply, for your first question, on the water supply, not only is it likely that I believe it's technically impossible for the reservoirs to be affected by this landfill. It's not just like we're saying, oh, it's likely. It's not. It's technically impossible. This is not only up gradient, it's tens or hundreds of feet up gradient in terms of elevation. So it just can't happen. So hopefully that clarifies it. We have absolutely no question that those reservoirs can't be impacted by the landfill.
What safety net is the EPA, creating that will be available should the impossible happen?
Well, it's a technical impossibility in my view. The safety net for those things are the buffer zones around that. That's why we in the state put those buffer zones around reservoirs to make sure that they can't be impacted. And, to the extent that the impossible happened, EPA is responsible for water supplies as well. It's not just that we're responsible for hazardous waste cleanups. We're responsible for water supplies. We're responsible for stormwater. We're responsible for air contamination. It's not just this. I mean, we have several offices at EPA, all of which are responsible for this stuff. And we are communicating constantly on this and communicating with the state as well. So again, it's an impossibility, but our job is to not only clean up the site, but also to protect that water supply. We have a whole separate group of people doing that as well.
Right. And like Brian said, I had it, but I omitted it. There will be a series of monitoring wells ringing this disposal area. So if the concern could groundwater, even though we don't think it's physically possible to get to that landfill, you would first see it in the monitoring wells around the landfill. And then what you can do if you have to, you just extend your perimeter of monitoring wells.
Thank you.
And that would be the warning sign. Let me put it that way.
A quick interjection for folks who are public attendees. We're delighted you're here. We will have a public comment at 7:45 for you to be able to raise your hand and verbally speak. But in the meantime, it will be just the CCC and EPA members. But if you have a question and want to put it in Q&A, in the meantime, I'll try to get to it. So I just wanted to note that. And there's actually a question from Judy first, Keener, Brian. And first, Brian, I heard what you said. In fact, you are going to require GE monitor residential wells within 500 feet if they don't go on town water. And of course, that person can refuse that, but you would require GE to do that. Brian, did I hear that right? I just want to make sure I heard that and I stated. Brian, you're on mute. Brian, you're on mute.
Sorry. I had a good point too, but the permit has plans, and again, the public will be able to see those plans as well for monitoring not only groundwater, but air and everything around the landfill during the work and after we're done with the work. So in those plans, we will incorporate, if there are wells within 500 feet that are still operational, we will incorporate sampling into that, and we'll make sure that happens. Again, the property owners could refuse that. It's happened before that property owners refuse it. There are times when we feel like if there's a public health issue, we may force the property owners to allow us to sample to make sure that, no one's going to be harmed by any contamination. But for the most part, I think people would want their well sampled if it was for free, and we'll make GE do it. Again, that's, in the context of this 500-foot buffer thing.
Yep. A question from Judy, because going forward, Dean, we mentioned chances to comment on, say, the transportation plan or whatever. Are those formal or informal public comment periods? And I think Heel and Judy are requesting that they be formal, so it actually comments go on the record. And then
the comments can go on the record. The comments can be posted on the webpage. EPA will take them into consideration, but unlike the regulations for a draft permit, EPA is not obligated, and we don't intend to do like a response to comments to all of the comments we receive. So the difference between formal and informal, I'm not exactly sure what that means. However, all the comments can go on the record and they will all be considered, and then EPA will proceed after considering all those comments.
Okay, great. And maybe just one more question, and I'll turn it back to you to keep going. I think there is a question from the public in the Q&A about, I think, kind of concerns about the aquifer feeding the Woods Pond and or the reservoirs, the question of whether the groundwater, there could be a linkage if there isn't on surface water. So I don't know that you have maps or data to show right now, but I think the groundwater maybe remains a concern for some folks. So
Is that the groundwater from Woods Pond or the groundwater from the UDF area?
I think it's that I'm just going to read this to you. The second point I'd like to make is that talks of surface water not heading to town's water supply, but does not mention the spring-fed nature of the reservoir, which I guess is the town's reservoir.
Yeah, Dean did mention groundwater. Dean did mention groundwater, and groundwater is the same situation. It's groundwater flows away from those reservoirs. Maybe right close to the reservoirs, there's upward gradients into the reservoir, but in that, when you look at that overall watershed, groundwater flows away from those reservoirs towards the UDF area. And again, it's over a mile away, but even if it weren't, it's flowing away from it. So that's, that again, I believe that's not technically possible for the groundwater that's down by the UDF or even in the gravel pit anywhere to be able to make its way up gradient to that, to any of the reservoirs.
And just to add to that, some of the information we have comes from the 2 landfills. They have groundwater monitoring wells around the Lee landfill and the Schweitzer Modwe, or the former paper company landfill. And that data is been submitted to the state. There's a lot of reports on that. So you can look at the well data and the elevation of the water within those wells. And that confirms that the direction of groundwater is from the Lee landfill and from the Schweitzer Modwe landfill towards the river, and away from the reservoirs.
And there was and we may have to wait till public comment to clarify. I think there's just a concern from one public about spring-fed water and kind of the springs maybe that are feeding some things. So if you want to say more about that, or we can wait till 7:45.
I think that's what I was saying about spring fed. That means the groundwater is providing input into that reservoir. I think that's what they're speaking to. So there's water that's coming up from the bottom into the ponds, into the reservoirs. That is very much localized to that area, and that's part of the reason why they have those crosshatch buffer zones around the reservoir. So that's a localized action where the water is going up into the reservoir. But overall, that groundwater the groundwater from the UDF cannot make it to that buffer area. So it's just technically impossible for that to happen.
Right. I'm going to go just go to the time. Let's see, Tim. I think Tim has a comment, and after Tim, maybe we'll go on just to keep things moving. Tim, Gray, over to you. And Tim, just make sure you unmute there at the bottom of your screen, I think. There you go. You got it.
Yeah. I just want to point out something is that back in about 1994, the EPA used to tell us that PCBs don't volatilize into the air. They were absolutely sure about it. And HRI, which was bringing it up at the time, led by Dr. David Carpenter, who studies volatilization of PCBs, probably one of the foremost studiers of it in the world. And guess what? They measure it in the air all the time. And they measure it 3 miles away from PCB sources like rivers and things like that. They measure it in the bark of trees because as it evaporates from rivers and sources of PCBs, it finds bark because PCBs are lipid sensitive and bark of trees made of lipids. I also want to point out that EPA sampled a little pond during this whole 20-year mess. And I think it's called 3 Mile Pond or something like that. It's down in Sheffield. And most of the water bodies in the world react the same way as this little pond did, is that there's PCBs. Now, maybe they're trace PCBs, but they're in the pond. I think we ought to test the Lee water supply right now and find out if there's any PCBs in it, because you want to know something? They volatilize and they get in and they move around. That's why we're afraid of it being 1 mile away from this dump source. And the public health experts are on our side. They basically will tell you that there is no place for a toxic dump near neighborhoods, near people of this point. And I want to end up with just talking about the hydraulics of this dump site and how when you hike on this mountain, it's one mass of moving water. And as it moves down towards the dump site, it's moving through that. The operators that worked on that site years ago, they can tell you that it's a moving bunch of water. And you've got this dump 1,100 feet uphill from the river. So guess what's going to happen if it ever starts to leak? Now you say that liners don't leak and dumps don't leak. But guess what? The Schweitzer Mortar mill you just told us about over there, the old paper mill dump that's over there, it's leaking. It's not only leaking, but it's leaking into one of our members' backyards. So I'm going to end up with that. And I'm telling you, if you believe what EPA is saying, you're going to find out that down the road, you're going to get burnt.
All right, Tim, we can hear you loud and clear.
All right, let me respond to that, Patrick.
Yeah, do respond.
I respond to that. You can't just let that go unresponded.
No. Please do, and then we'll move on. So,
volatilization. We've never said that PCBs don't volatilize. We've said they volatilize at very low levels, and that we still believe that.
Please let Brian finish.
And we still believe that they volatilize at low levels, and yet, we still want where the PCBs are going to volatilize the most is in the existing conditions right now. Where it's sitting in the river, sitting in Woods Pond at very, large areas of PCB contamination. When you go and dig it up, it's going to volatilize more, but that's only going to be a short period of time. And our position, and I think most public health experts' position, it's worth that short period of time to get it out of the river. And then once you get it into a landfill, it will no longer be volatilizing. So that's our position on that. In terms of the other dumps, the Schweitzer landfill, that is an unlined landfill, and that I don't think it's known exactly what is in that landfill. Unlike what we're talking about here, the low levels of PCBs. So we're concerned about getting the PCBs out of the river. If it's volatilizing much more now than it ever will be when it's in a safe landfill. The other thing is, if the PCBs were just going to leach out of think about this now, if the PCBs were going to leach out of the sediments, especially these low-level PCBs, that would be happening in the river right now, right? We wouldn't have any more PCBs in the first 10 miles of the river. They would all be in Long Island Sound. That is not happening because, like Tim said, what I do agree with is that there's going to be more affinity to the carbon or the lipids, like Tim said. So those PCBs are sticking to the soil. They don't want to move. If they did move, they'd be in Long Island Sound. So that is, we feel really strongly that getting the material out of the river is the right thing to do, and putting in a safe landfill at low levels, sending the higher levels off site is the right thing to do. And we think it's absolutely safe, and we will prove it by monitoring as we go along.
Thank you. I know we have some other things to cover. So, Dean, I think I'm going to hand it back to you to kind of keep going.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about ongoing design work, and then Tim's going to give a little status on where we are with the permit. So now that the permit is final, GE is obligated, regardless of any appeals, to continue with all design and sampling requirements that are in the permit. They're also required to do some other actions such as inspections, monitoring, and maintenance of Rising Pond and Woods Pond. Those are two dams that are owned by GE. And this actually came up in one of our public hearings. Is GE doing any maintenance? So yes, they are. We have been requiring and overseeing GE's inspection, monitoring, and maintenance of both of these dams for the last several years. So that's one action they need to keep going on. The second one that they've been doing for several years is what's called consumption advisories, posting signs and outreach. And we're expanding that. We've had some discussions with Connecticut, a lot of discussions with Connecticut lately on how best to improve signage down there. And hopefully shortly that will be finalized and GE will increase its outreach. Other activities that GE is doing and will continue to do is sampling. They've sampled, I think, 27 residential properties in what's called Reach 5A, or the Pittsfield section. There are more sampling plans coming on the floodplain, soil, vernal pools, backwaters, banks, and sediment. So we're focusing on Reach 5, the Pittsfield part, because that's the first part that would be remediated. And that's going to happen regardless of where the material goes. And then secondly, GE did submit what's called a SOW, or a statement of work pursuant to the permit, last June. And that attempts to lay out all the design and sampling documents to be provided going forward. So EPA is reviewing that. We're discussing that. We've already received stakeholder comments on that. We're in discussions with GE to finalize a schedule for the additional sampling and design. And we will go through and continue with the sampling and design for the next couple of years. So that's all I had on ongoing work under the permit. And now I think, I don't know if Tim, if you had some update on the status of the permit you want to give.
So Tim, we'll turn it over to you.
Sure. Hi, everybody. It's great to see people's faces, and I hope everybody is well. My name's Tim Conway. Along with John Kilborn, we're the EPA attorneys who have been working on the Housatonic cleanup. So in addition to the technical and scientific information that Brian and Dean have been providing, we thought in case anybody hadn't been following it all along, we could lay out this, how we got here and the status of the permit that we issued in December. So as you all know, the PCBs from GE's Pittsfield facility have led to unacceptable risks to human health and to the ecology of the river, and had to many portions of Pittsfield. And EPA pursued GE and forced GE to do a federal court consent decree in which GE was required to clean up nearly 30 different major significant areas of PCB contamination to reduce any potential risks to human health or the environment. That consent decree was entered in the year 2000, and virtually all of the cleanups are done except for the Rest of River, which we're all debating now. As you know, the Rest of River, under the consent decree, whatever is the eventual decision after all the appeals and remands, is for the Rest of River is something that GE is required under court order to implement. To advance things with the Rest of River, in July of this year, EPA issued a draft modification of the RCRA permit, which is the federal statutory structure for the cleanup plan that we've been working on. And so in July, we issued that for public comment and got an awful lot of comments on the proposed cleanup plan. And in December 2 months ago, we, following evaluation of all the comments we received on the cleanup plan proposal, we issued a revised final permit modification under RCRA, or the Resource Conservation Recovery Act. And that requires GE for the Rest of River to perform specific corrective actions and to meet specific performance standards that were set by EPA as a way of minimizing the unacceptable risks of the PCBs in the river and in the floodplain, in the bank soils. At the time we did that, and Dean mentioned the response to comments earlier, at that time we also issued a detailed response to comments for all the commenters from the public. And on the fact sheet that the EPA sent around yesterday, it has links to the links to the different documents having to do with the December 2020 permit. So you can take a look at that for those website links. So the cleanup process, under RCRA has a opportunity for interested parties to petition for review of the EPA decision, and the petitions for review are sent to EPA's Environmental Appeals Board, similar to what happened with the 2016 permit. We understand that, and I would rather they speak to it themselves, but we understand that HRI and HEAL have indicated they're going to be filing an appeal, and the EAB said that petition would be due March 5th. And we're not aware of any other appeals on that. The Environmental Appeals Board has its own website that we can circulate the link to. It's not as long as some of those website links on the fact sheet. It's just the EPA.gov, then a slash, and then the 3 letters EAB Echo Alpha Bravo. So that's their website, and they run the process of the petitions for review. We'd be glad to answer any questions. Thank you all for coming, and we, with any of the back and forth tonight, we've tried our best to answer any questions, but I made what Dean said earlier. I think that we have to remember the key thing is the permit and the administrative record. That's the record for our cleanup plan, and but we'd be glad to see if we can answer questions as we go. And Dean, did you have any more on the scientific technical front?
No, I'm all set. Thanks.
Great. So CCC members, questions for John or Tim regarding kind of the permitting process and kind of where we are with that process? Questions or comments about that? Okay. I think then, Dean, in terms of our next part, I don't know if and there's a few questions in the Q&A I'll come back to in a second, back to the dams in a minute. But I think, I don't know what was our next step in terms of what Brian was going to speak to or the like in terms of either next timeline milestones or the like for the work.
I think we went over the timeline. So really, I think the next step was for the CCC members and the public. As far as I'm concerned, we're good with either one. If they have discussion or questions, if they have questions on the SOW, which are, the work going forward, that's fine. I can address those. If they have other questions, I think we would open it up to the CCC.
Okay, great. So let me just pose one question, which is regarding the dams. So I think in the Q&A, there's a longer commentary about some of the background and some of the dams, but I think a concern is there has been landslides in the past, worried about any potential breach of a dam. And so will there be an underwater inspection of the dam before work goes forward to make sure that not only the dam itself, but its undergirding sediments or the like is safe and secure for the dam's safety and security?
Yeah, I'll try and answer this. We do have another project manager who's very involved with it. I believe there has been a dive inspection at least one of the dams. So that has been done. GE submitted a very detailed and it was significantly revised, what's called a biennial dam inspection report, which goes through each feature of the dam and what needs to be inspected. And we've done oversight of that. They also do quarterly inspections, which we're doing. There's also going to be a forthcoming inspection of, I'll get this wrong, but the sluiceway on Rising Pond, where they need to exercise the gates and make sure all the seals are working properly. So there is a lot of inspections, both surface, subsurface, on the dam. One of the things we required was some baseline topography and bathymetry. So bathymetry would be the sediment elevation underwater, similar to topography, excuse me, it's just underwater. And you can use that as a baseline to see if things are shifting. So there's been a real lot of work on the dams. The other thing with that, we've also coordinated those reviews with the Office of Dam Safety, and we've invited towns of Lenox, Lee, and Great Barrington, if they want their town engineers or anybody else to come on these inspections, and they have in several occasions done that.
Great. CCC members, other questions for the team here in terms of the permit process? Jane.
Hi, I probably should remember this, but I don't. Is AECom going to be going back out to check on the vernal pools that didn't get certified but look like they're possibly certifiable?
I think there were 8. So a little background, GE did a 2-year inspection of water bodies or potential vernal pools in the Reach 5A area. They identified, I don't know the exact amount. It was a lot, maybe 69 or 70. Submitted them to Mass Fish and Game, who officially certifies vernal pools. And I think they've officially certified, I'm just going to use rough numbers because I'll be off a little, say 50 of the 70. They've indicated that a certain amount could be certified with additional photographic evidence. And then they had a subset that they didn't think under any circumstances would be certified. So we're working with, we just had a discussion on that today. GE is going to attempt to either get those remaining ones certified or treat them under the permit as certifiable vernal pools. So we're calling through our photographs to see if that will help as well. So that is ongoing.
Dean, there was a question from earlier. I now want to get to from the public, and there was a concern that the abutters essentially to the site where things will be landfilled, that then residential abutters were not notified. So I don't know if you can talk about any process you did use to notify them during this process, or how they will be reached out to going forward.
Who are these stakeholders? So stakeholder to me is anybody who's interested in this project. As far as notifying residential abutters, I don't know what that's exactly referring to. Abutters to what? To the river, to the landfill?
Yeah, the proposed landfill.
Well, first of all, there really are no abutters. There's the gravel pit and maybe 2 other properties. So this is how we notify people as best we can with public meetings and outreach and emails. And that's the best answer I have on that.
And Brian, do you want to speak to that a little bit more?
There is one abutter that's, probably closer than other people to the landfill, and we have been talking to that person throughout the last several months. So I think there probably could have been better outreach prior to the, issuing the agreement back a year or so ago. But since then, there's been lots of discussions with, like Dean said, there aren't many abutters to the landfill itself, but we have had discussions.
Thank you, Brian. Tim, and this is for Tim, and well, I guess maybe the whole team, but for Tim and John at least. So you said that after reviewing the public comments, and having the public comment period, you reissued the permit as well as a response to comments. What changes, if any, were made from the draft of the final permit given public comment?
We actually have a listing in the response to comments document of different changes that have been that were made based on the public comments. I don't have the memory to go through them all here, so I can't really give you a catalog of them. But it is in in the response to comments document, we do have a listing of the changes made from the draft to the final permit based on public comments.
So you don't only have response to individual comment, you actually do go through in that document and describe the changes from draft to final.
Yeah, I believe it's an attachment to the response to comments document that has the different things that had changed from the draft to the final. John or Dean, does that sound right?
Yes. In response to comments.
Right. Thank you. All right. Other comments from the CCC about, again, the proposed action as well as the details of the process and permitting and the like. And what I want to do is talk a little bit about EPA, where you see and how you see the CCC interacting with you all going forward, and weigh in a little bit on that. And then what we'll do is we'll then take comments from the public and open up the mics there. So in terms of next steps after tonight, an update where things are, or maybe one of the regarding the final permit. As the work progresses, what is your sense of CCC meetings, how things are going to proceed? If you can just give people a sense of the way forward.
This is, go ahead, Brian. If you want to
I'll just start by saying, and Dean can get into the details, but we feel like the CCC has been a really important group over the last, I don't know, couple of decades. I don't know how long it's been. It's been a long time, we have no intention of changing the importance of the CCC at all. But we want to hear from the CCC members as well, like how we will move forward, including, I mean, there's going to, like we were 15 years ago or so, the work is going to, whatever happens with the permit and appeals and everything, the work is going to go forward in a big way. There's going to be a lot going on. So there's going to have to be lots of interaction. And we think the CCC is a good way to do that. But Dean, can you go into any more details on that?
Did we lose Dean? No, there's Dean. Dean, you're on mute.
We've definitely, I think in the past we've had them quarterly, and we would like to keep that frequency going. Along with the regularly scheduled CCC meetings, what I would propose, and in addition to it, would be smaller neighborhood meetings or whatever it would take to get people comfortable to ask more questions. Obviously, that's a little hard right now in the situation we're in with COVID, but going forward, assuming we get beyond that at some point, we're open to any type of meeting in any venue, in any format that makes people comfortable. We are somewhat limited since there is litigation ongoing, so there's certain things we won't be able to talk about. I think people would understand that. We're not going to get into the merits of litigation. But from my end, from the engineering and or project manager and anything ongoing with the SOW or the statement of work or design documents, as Brian said, we're open to any suggestions or feedback that the CCC and or the public have to how to get this outreach. We can do a lot through email. Kelsey's always, we're always available for calls. And any type of meeting. I know when I did the 1.5 miles, we had meetings just with the affected neighbors because a lot of them don't like talking in big meetings. So we're open to any way that is helpful to the community and especially the people most impacted.
Right. I think Jane, you had a question or comment, or Bruce?
Yeah. I brought this up before, and I just don't want it to drop as an issue. I really feel for this to be a complete group, we really should have GE at the table. I know they're hesitant to do that, and I know you've asked them to be here before. And back in the earlier meetings when they were here, I know they sat there without answering questions, even when the questions were directed at them specifically. But still, it would be good if we had GE here, and I would encourage the EPA to try again, unless you have been continuously, to try to get them to participate in these meetings.
Thanks, Bruce. I agree with you. Actually, I think it would be good to have them at these meetings. There was a time, I think, when it probably wasn't productive to have them there, when they weren't saying anything, and people were mad at them or whatever. I think there was a time when it wasn't productive. But I do think let's get through the litigation, whatever happens through that, and then get to a point where we can hopefully we're sort of moving forward, as a group, and we're pushing GE, all of us pushing GE to do the right thing and, do the work right and get the right monitoring and everything. And I think those kind of discussions, they should be there for, no doubt. And we will, I promise you, I will try and push them to do that. They do have some new management in place, and I think they'll be more receptive to that. But we have to get through the litigation first.
One I just want to note, I'm looking at the chat. I think Judy made the note that we should poll the CCC about expectations for future meetings, which we can certainly do. So we're happy to do that after tonight. So Judy, that's a great idea. Reed noted with Zoom, it's even easier to show up to meetings. You can do it from your living room. So I think point noted. There is a question about really this, which is there's a concern about whether V is represented on the CCC. And I want to just know if CCC members of EPA can speak to whether V has representation on this group. I don't know.
I don't recall, Pat, if they're representative or they're just not attending this one, but we can look back at our attendance list. I wanted to do that before this meeting. I did forget, but we can take a look at that.
Okay, so I think,
and if not, if the town of Lee wants to designate someone, obviously we're more than willing to have them participate.
So the two kind of process to do is one is we'll definitely pull folks, as Judy asked, about expectations for future CCC meetings, and we'll look into a lead representative. And if there is not one active and current on the group, we'll I think maybe reach the town of Lee to try to fix that. Okay, there's a few other questions coming in. I want to just note, and at some point we'll open this up too, but I want to get through these. So I'm going to read this one just because I want to capture the nuance of it. So Dean, it's from Claire. It's the ACEC extends south of Woods Pond into the wooded wetland where the dump will be placed. I consider I'm in a butter as the major aquifer under the dump site extends under my property. Again, the wooded wetland with endangered species, as told to me by DCR employees, is important both for protection but also flood mitigation. How much of a buffer will be left between the dump and our scenic woodland road?
I'm going to try and share this screen a little bit, or I'm going to try and share it, excuse me. I don't have an exact dimension, but hopefully you can see this screen here. Where the hand is going to be Woodland Road. So you can see that it's reasonably close. The actual disposal area is well to the west of Woodland Road. I can't really scale it off at the moment, but most of the area you can kind of see underneath this lime green disposal area. And if you look back at some of the other areas, most of this area where the landfill's going, probably 95% of it is already heavily disturbed. So there is no vegetation that needs to be removed in the disposal area itself. It's been turned over. There's chunks of concrete, debris, the power line, the main transmission lines go through there. So that's a couple points. The other point is GE will be required to assess and document the existing habitat outside the gravel pit area or the area that's completely disturbed. And if any of the support area gets disturbed, they'll have to work with us and especially the town of Lee and anybody else as to how to restore that area and either for reuse or for habitat restoration. So I can look up and try and get a distance and get that to you, Claire, but I can't do it off the top of my head.
Why don't we leave that as maybe an action item for our meeting summary and for a future follow-up in terms of the actual distance. Someone asked if there was ever a chance to have a meeting or at least a site visit to the actual proposed area. And is there any access to this area? Who owns it at this point? Could the CCC or anybody else ever tour the site like we've done sometimes on site tours?
Yeah, this is Brian. With the, obviously with the litigation, we're not going to be able to do that now. And I think it's tough to we can't force Lane to allow people on that property. Although many people on the CCC have seen it. We did go on a tour at one time. But I do think that we should try to find an opportunity where everyone can go again. Again, you would be able to see what Dean was just talking about. The area is very disturbed, with piles of debris all over the place, and asphalt, concrete, and everything in different places. I do think it's a good idea to see these things. In addition to being able to not only, if this, as we get into this, and if this moves forward, seeing it along the way too, as things happen. You don't want, we want to see it before anything. And then if it does get built, we want to see it, as it's getting built, as it's moving on. We want this to be really transparent so people can see what's actually going on there. So yeah, the answer is yes. The timing though is the question. Nothing's going to be happening in that location for a while, even if we were to get through the appeals and everything, or the appeal, sooner rather than later. It's still going to take some time to design and that sort of thing. But I do think it's a good idea, and we would certainly encourage, being able to get some access to see the area. And I think GE would probably agree with that, as long as we could figure out a way to deal with liabilities and all that kind of thing.
And one suggestion is, could you actually do a video, maybe via drone or the like, potentially get a view of the site, even if you can't have access to the property directly?
Yeah, we could probably do that. You'd be surprised at how controversial drone use is, from EPA's perspective, but we could try to do that. I'm sure GE could do it themselves. The EPA at one time over the last couple of years wasn't able to use drones at all, for various reasons, including privacy issues and that sort of thing. So, but I think, there may be a way to view it. I think that might be a good way to view it. And obviously the best way is to be there, but we'll see what we can do about getting GE to fly over it, or even, putting a bucket truck up there or something and just, showing the view around the whole place. But we'll try something like that so that people can see it. I think it is, there is a woodland buffer between Woodland Road and the area, and it would be good to be able to see that area, and we definitely want that wooded buffer to stay. And if it does, if parts of it aren't able to stay, then they would have to, they should be replaced so that we have that buffer there.
There's a question about why, Dean, you mentioned the RCRA permit and kind of a RCRA process, and there's a concern about, given the extent of contamination and the length, is why this is not a Superfund site versus a RCRA site or a non-Superfund site. And Brian, I don't know.
Yeah, Tim, do you want to answer that?
I can try and give that a shot. No, that's a really good question. We the RCRA corrective action process that the permit is under, it's meant to be very similar to the CERCLA process, the CERCLA remedial design, remedial action process. A lot of our consent decree was based on the all of the other cleanups that were done in Pittsfield along the river are done through CERCLA. And then this one, there was an existing RCRA permit in place at the time of the consent decree, that it has been continued and reissued. And it is meant to, through the corrective action process in RCRA, it's meant to accomplish the same type of cleanup of unacceptable risks to human health and the environment. The consent decree does have a provision that at the conclusion of EPA having a final permit that has gone through all the appeals processes, that the remedial action at the site, the actual cleanup, would take place pursuant to CERCLA. So it will be a CERCLA cleanup in the long run. So it's a real good question.
There is just a question about ownership. Does Lane still own the property? And will they still own it after the disposal takes place on the site, or folks are calling it the dump?
So I'd have to check with GE to verify. I think Lane still owns the property right now. I think GE has some kind of purchase and sale, but I'm not sure exactly what that is. So they can, you know, they have the ability to buy it. And Lane will not own it. As far as I know, Lane will not own it if GE moves forward with this.
Okay, great. And just terminology, CERCLA is essentially, I can't remember quite what it stands for, but it essentially stands for the Superfund program, right, Brian?
Yeah, Superfund. It's an acronym for the statute.
There, just one concern about access to kind of public information and the like, and then I'll go to Charlie. Someone said that they attended a meeting after signing in at the Lenox High School when the federal mediator was there, but they have not been notified since. So there's a concern about not getting on an email list. Is there a way, Kelsey, for people to sign up to an email list or find a way so they can get notifications of at least these meetings or other things going forward?
Yes, the best thing to do is either email me or anyone on your team too. And I'd be happy to add you to that list.
And if you joined this meeting tonight, it means that you provided your email to get a registration link. So we can add folks who signed up if they would like to the mailing list going forward.
Right.
And I should add on our website too is all of our contact information. So it should be easy there to reach out.
And Kelsey, are you okay putting your email in the chat, which can be available to everyone, and then people can email you if they want to be on the list?
I'd love to. I'm having trouble getting into the chat. I cannot access it. So if someone wouldn't mind doing that for me, Cameron's trying to help me offline to figure that out. But
Elizabeth,
do that.
Well, and so so Claire, for you to get on the list, we'll make sure that Kelsey's email is in the chat here in just a little bit. I think Charlie, you had a question or comment? Charlie, you're on mute, I think. Shouldn't be. Let me see. Hang on a second. Let's see what's going on. Elizabeth, do you want to help out here? Why can we not hear Charlie? He's speaking. Try turning up your volume on your computer. See if that helps.
Charlie, if you need to troubleshoot, if you press the little arrow next to your microphone in the lower left corner, it should tell you sort of which sound system you're connected to. I don't see, it looks to me like you are connected. So I'm confused about that.
We'll give Charlie just a second. Okay. Charlie, what I'm going to do is, let me give Charlie a minute here to get that squared away.
But Charlie, you can press that little arrow there. And can
you hear me?
Oh, yes. Got it. Beautiful. Okay. Yes, sir. Got it.
Plugged in an external microphone.
You did.
In 2019, there was an article in the Eagle that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts fined the Lane Corporation for doing damage to the riverbanks of that facility there. And in that article, it also said that Lane sold the property to Eurovia SAS for $555 million. So I think we have to find out who really owns it now and, make sure that, hopefully Eurovia won't allow you to put a dump there.
Yeah. I should have clarified that. When I say Lane, I just mean the current owners of the gravel pit. Lane sold it, like you said, a couple of years ago, I think, to another company that's doing the exact same thing, and all the agreements with GE went forward with that sale. That's, as far as I know, that's the situation. So,
and did they resolve the riverbank damage? What did they do to resolve that? Any idea what that?
They did resolve it. I don't know is there anyone from the state on that could answer? John, could you answer that question, or we could find out? Charlie, I know they did. John, we can't hear you. Oh, Charlie, what I do know is that that was an issue. It happened right before we went to visit the landfill with the whole group of people, and that was an issue for us to even get on there, because I know the company was aggravated that they were going through that process, and we were like, well, we still want to go see it, you know. Yeah. But I assume it got resolved, but we could definitely, DEP could figure out. It was through the Mass AG's office, if I remember right. There was some kind of a issue through the Mass AG's office. Charlie, can I just say that it's nice to see Barbara there in your picture behind you. So.
And I'm going to follow up on that. This is the first time that we've actually met since the EPA awarded Barbara a Lifetime Achievement Award last September as a group. And I want to thank the EPA for thinking of her, for, honoring her. And I'm sorry that Larry Parnas has already left this GD meeting, because I wanted to complain that the Berkshire Eagle would not acknowledge publicly any article about Barbara to put that in. I had to pay to get something in the Eagle to announce that award. And I feel that the Eagle may also be not really always honest with information that is coming out about this whole process. That's my opinion. I'm sure Barbara's watching all of this, and if you're lucky enough to go to heaven, she'll greet you. But there's a lot of people that aren't going to do a good job, so she doesn't have to worry about you when you go the other way. Thank you.
So Charlie, we as a team here, we nominated Barbara and all the people that are on this call, and we were very proud to do that. And we really thought a lot of her and you. And frankly, we think a lot about all the environmental advocates in the Berkshires, everyone that's on this call, whether, we agree with you or not. You guys are doing all this work on your own time. I'm getting paid to do this and you're not. So again, Barbara was special to us, and we appreciate the work that she did, but also the work that all of you do.
Thank you.
Great. No, thank you. And I think the CCC really is so honored to have had our time with Barbara and the commitment she made, and it is really lovely to see her. I think there's a few other questions, and then we will see if other CCC questions, and we'll take public comment verbally as well. There was a question about what are some of the potential ways the site will be reused? Could areas surrounding Woods Pond be included in a conversation for reuse and recreation?
I don't know if there's anyone from the towns that are on, but we've certainly had those conversations. I personally offered up that I think that, we should be thinking about reuse. I think, we at EPA would be comfortable reusing this area once it's done. And certainly the area around Woods Pond is used heavily right now. And we would love it to be used even more heavily in terms of walking traffic and that sort of thing, and fishing and whatever. I think it's a great area, and frankly, at some point that gravel pit is going to have no more gravel in it, and I would love to see that incorporated into something next to the river and protecting the river. And I think you can reuse it. The EPA, almost, I wouldn't say all of our landfills, but many of our landfills are, especially if they're built in a way to sort of think about reuse, are reused, whether it be through solar farms or building buildings on top of them or whatever. We would certainly welcome that, and we will have discussions with the towns and give advice or whatever we need to do on that.
So let me take one more question from the Q&A, and then I'll go to the attendees and check for folks who want to raise their hand and speak verbally, if that's okay with the CCC. So one other question was, when GE says they will pay for people with the parameter for new water hookups, then I guess the 500 feet, exactly what will that cover? Is that just the fee from the DPW to hook up? Does it cover the cost for the installation of water pipes from their house to the water line, and the plumber, excavator, and other kind of work that would be required to do the entire job to completely hook up to the town?
Yeah, this is Dean. I'll take a shot at that first. The way I read the permit, and I think the way GE reads it, is they have to pay for everything: the plumber, the excavation, the backfill, a water meter if that's required, whatever's required. If there's a fee, a hookup fee, some towns have hookup fees. You know, whatever it takes to get the water hooked up. And then, although not in the permit, there could be a way to see if there's a difference. I know I've done this on other sites between, electrical or water costs and what you would have paid for your pump. Is there a differential there that maybe GE could pick up? But also, as far as I know, there's only one well within that 500-foot range. Now, GE's got to look. There may be a few more now, and and there is the possibility somebody could move in. I guess theoretically, at least in the future. So I guess the short version is they'd have to pay all costs to get at least hooked up.
Thank you. Okay, great. Thank you very much. So what I'd like to do, CCC, is it okay if I turn to see if there's any public comment from folks? And so for attendees, if you want to make a verbal comment, what you just do is raise your hand. I see Claire has her hand up, so I'm going to go to her first, and then Monica. And then what I'll do is just ask. What we'll do is Elizabeth can unmute you so you can speak. We'll say your name so we can make sure we hear you. Let's test the audio first, and then you can speak. And if people could kind of keep their question or comment to a few minutes, just so we get everybody in who wants to. And if it's a question, we'll of course then leave time for EPA to respond. So I think, let's see, Monica, you're up first.
Hi, this is Monica.
We can hear you.
Okay, great. If they could share the map again, Dean.
Monica, we lost you for a second, but go ahead.
Okay. If Dean could share the map again, I have a question about the water, the legend. The orange lines show I think underwater or watershed sub basins, right? Am I reading that right? Those orange lines that crisscross between the disposal area and the Leahy Reservoir, the three orange.
I can get back to you on that. I think what those are more surface watershed, so water flowing off surface water subbasins. That's from the Mass GIS system. Okay. So I don't think it has anything to do with groundwater. I think it's got to do with, the best way I can describe it is like a certain basin. You can kind of see the one to the northwest of the Leahy Reservoir. It looks like the water flows in both directions there to a low point. So that's a sub-basin. So it's like 2 or 3 sub-basins away, or different watershed areas away from the disposal area to the reservoir.
Right. So my further question is, and I raised the one earlier about spring-fed. Now, it is my contention that spring-fed water that would come into the Leahy Reservoir from underneath the water's surface comes from a much lower area and from aquifers that go, I believe, as far as the disposal area. And if that's the case, that's my hypothesis, is that it goes, these orange lines, I think, go beyond that, and probably as far as the Housatonic River even. So, and with that in mind, the fact that they're going to monitor this and we're going to keep an eye on it approach is just too risky to our town's drinking water. And I'm a district representative in the town of Lee, and so I represent the people of Lee in my district and in the whole town. And that's my major concern, is our town's drinking water supply, I think, is much too close to where spring-fed water, and before you kept talking about water running off and going downhill. Well, spring-fed water comes from a very deep area that goes much wider, deep and wide. And so I don't believe that you're mentioning how it goes, there's no way, it's too far, it's impossible. I don't think that's true. And I really believe that's got to get looked at, because you can't go back once the drinking water is messed up. And that's my super, super duper concern, is our drinking water right now. Okay, so that's what I want to let you know about. And I really feel that's got to get explored much deeper sooner.
Thank you.
I want to say one thing that I know Brian wants to say something. The reason I talked about surface water runoff is that was one concern that we've heard numerous times. So you're right. There are two distinct issues. One is the surface water, which I just don't see any way that it can flow up there. As far as the underground aquifer, you're right. It probably does extend from Leahy towards the river. And Brian will weigh in a little bit, but it doesn't mean all the water within that aquifer is going to flow from the disposal area to the reservoir, even if it's spring fed. And I understand you still have concerns, and they're certainly valid. We just think the technical evaluation of hydrology and groundwater flow is clearly from the disposal area and not towards the river and not towards the reservoir. Brian, I'm sorry if I cut you off.
No, that's fine, Dean. And this is a great question. We have looked at it, and you know, I do think it's not technically possible for that to happen. And the reason is that the spring-fed part of it, the water that's coming into the area that it then is upwelling into these reservoirs is coming from up on the mountain. And you can't see it on this part of the map, but the area to the right of the Leahy Reservoir also has a strong gradient down the hill. And so the water is flowing. It's not just the surface gradient, but the groundwater gradient as well is flowing down the hill. And then it hits this low point, this opening basically, where it then upwells into the Leahy Reservoir. It doesn't go in the other direction. And so that's why we think it's not possible. And you know, and the town really monitors these things really closely. And you know, as you know, I assume they would be concerned as well. If they were concerned about this, they would be even more concerned about the unlined landfills that are even closer to the town water supply.
I think one thing I might just note, CCC, is that, and I'll go to John, is that this may be a good conversation in more detail at a future CCC meeting where we can have maps and charts and maybe the state can weigh in and we can have a little more detailed conversation in the future. So John Ziegler, over to you.
Yeah, hopefully everyone can hear me now. But I just wanted to just say that, yeah, I agree with what Brian and Dean are saying from a technical standpoint. In order for that surface water body to be impacted, either surface flow or groundwater flow would have to be going uphill, which is really technically impossible. So I just wanted to put that out there from SDP.
Water, right? Because they have another place to go. And
so, Claire, any follow up before I go to Monica? Okay, I think Monica, if Cam, you could unmute Monica so she could speak. She's up next.
I think Monica just went, but now.
Oh, so it's Claire's next. Okay, Claire, you're next. Sorry about that. So if we could unmute Claire.
Claire, you just have to unmute yourself, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Claire, your unmute button should be the bottom of your screen on the kind of left-hand side.
All right.
There you go. Gotcha.
Can't see me though, right?
I can't see you, but I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, the aquifer that I'm concerned with is the one that extends south from the upland disposal facility. It actually extends south from Woods Pond all the way down southeasterly, is that correct? Down to where my home is, and it's totally underneath a huge pasture that we have behind our house. And it's a very important aquifer, according to all the studies I've done, in that it is another water source for the town and the only water source other than the reservoirs. So there was concern, and I've worked on these open space and rec plans for 35 years each time they come up, and I've always wondered about that aquifer. And in the last report, it was stated, and this was along with the Berkshire Regional Planning Commission, looking at their data, that this, and there was a warning in there that this is a very important aquifer that should be, it may not ever be needed, but it is a water source that would be the principal backup. Now, from what I understand from Timmy Gray, that it may have been already polluted, but I'm not convinced that it's unusable usable because of that, or that it could not be cleaned up, or that it might purify itself at some point. But it's a major aquifer, and it should show up on, well, it does show up on your maps that you had with your whole packet of the original. Actually, it's in the packet of our open space and land study, the aquifer, and a lot has been written about that and studied, and our town's selectmen have this all available to them. I just can't understand when they went into this whole thing with the kind of education that we had given them, hours and hours and hours and days and weeks, putting these open space plans together over the years, that they weren't more aware of the dangers that we're facing. And again, there's all the warnings about mitigation of flooding. We've had flooding in the past, and it tells in our report there that it was like over $3 million over the years from flooding, and warning that we have very erodible, sandy soils that are unique to this area. And the area where there was a landslide was down just below the Vanetti Reservoir, but it's the same soil structure. There was a whole side of a hill that slid down and created, did a lot of silting in of streams. And that was probably 20, 30 years ago. And I haven't found a lot on, not much of a report on it, but I've been researching FEMA records and looking at what kind of dam protection we've had over the years. As far, in the last study by FEMA was like 1976. I mean, our infrastructure is really threatened, and I am quite concerned about the dam, plus the danger to this aquifer. In addition to the fact that in that little buffer zone of woods, if the dump isn't going there, the upland disposal facility will still drain down on that side as well as towards the river, and drain down into the wetland area that's between Woods Pond and the dump. So those are concerns. It doesn't seem like they have been addressed in the study. Thank you.
No, Cliff, thank you. And I wonder, again, I'm noting some things maybe for future CCC meetings, but I don't know whether Brian or Dean, you want to speak a little bit to the groundwater south of the site, what you know of its status, and what you'll be doing to protect that area as the landfill is, when and if it's built, what will be happening.
I'll just say that the groundwater in the area of the disposal area is flowing directly to the river, and that is very clear. And I just want to note that, although we're talking about all these, the theoretical movement of groundwater, we don't expect the groundwater to ever come in contact with the materials that are in this landfill. So that is, if something went wrong, it's still impossible for this other stuff to happen. We don't expect, based on the way this thing would be built, we don't expect those things to go wrong. But even if they did, that, that's what we're talking about in terms of it being impossible to get to the water supply. I just want to make clear that...
I'm not talking about the water supply. the drinking water supply.
No, I understand. I just want to make clear to Claire that the material that we're talking about moving to this consolidated location, the lower levels of it, are in Woods Pond in the river right now. 25% of the overall material in the whole system is sitting in Woods Pond that we would take out is sitting in Woods Pond with absolutely no controls on it right now. There's water flowing through it all the time. There is probably some PCBs making their way downstream, which isn't good. That's partly why we want to, get going as soon as we can. But that's the same material that would be sitting in a double line landfill with a cap on top of it, above the water table. That's the difference, and I understand there's a difference of opinion, but we are pretty clear about the fact that we can take it out of the river. And even when we talk about leaching, I don't even understand what would leach out of it. There's water in the pores of the soil that's the same water that's sitting in the bottom of the river right now. So it's just that's the part that we struggle with, and how to explain that and everything. But this is the same stuff that's out in the environment with absolutely no controls on it in people's backyards. Again, 25% of it is sitting in the bottom of Woods Pond.
So I just want to note, I think I've heard, go ahead.
Getting back to what you said and responding to Claire, I think, there's good questions, and hopefully during the design process, we can talk more about the wells once they're installed, what that shows as far as direction of groundwater flow with a much better presentation. And you've obviously got a lot of local knowledge and input, and that's great. And I think that back and forth will be helpful. But yeah, we're not in a position right now to have a full presentation on groundwater elevations and the full extent of the aquifer. So I'll just say that that's one of the reasons to continue with these meetings, and certainly everything on the design, how it's done, the groundwater investigation, the depth of groundwater, like Brian said, the landfill is going to be at least 15 feet above the groundwater table. All that is, we look forward to having those discussions.
Let me just do a quick summary, and then I know Cornelia has a comment. So the kind of issues I've identified for maybe future discussion is this question about the buffer, about the ACDC, the ownership of the site. Can people take a tour or at least get a kind of some view of it via maybe a drone? A set of questions that we've covered around aquifer and groundwater. And then obviously, I think kind of questions about the dam and dam safety and the kind of sediment or the bedrock, whatever it is underneath the dams themselves. So I guess there are four or five key issues to continue on with the CCC in future meetings, plus the two pieces about process, the lead rep, and the request to kind of check into what the CCC wants of expectations going forward. With that, Cornelia, I think if we can, Cam can open your mic, then it's over to you. And I think you said to unmute. Yep, you're ready to go, I think.
Hello, thank you very much can you hear me okay?
Yes, you sound great.
Thank you for including us in this meeting tonight. The one request I would have is most people on top, it says who's speaking, but sometimes there's not, and I can't see who's speaking or know who's speaking. And that would be very helpful in the future.
Good idea. Thank you. It's a great suggestion.
The other thing, I have a few comments. Just bear with me. Since I tried to hold them throughout this. One is in terms of the rail and truck issues. My understanding from when I wrote comments and some of the comments back is that neighborhoods would be very much included in that process of thinking that through in Lee. By the way, I'm a Lee town representative also and town resident. The second thing is you speak about health concerns in Pittsfield, and that's one of the big reasons for all of this. My question is in Lee, if there's any way, I wrote this in part of my comments too, I'm very concerned about cancer rates that are in Berkshire County. We're one of the highest rates in the state. And what the impact of the PCBs obviously have had in Pittsfield and now putting a dump in Lee. I know you say it would be contained, but in this process with the air quality concerns that you'll be monitoring, the impact that it could have on residents. And if we can have some way of monitoring things beforehand and after, I'm very concerned about that. The other thing, just a quick technical question that I'm just not, because I'm not versed in this, is on the map that you show. First of all, on the map that we see on our computer, you can't see the actual Housatonic River, which would be important so that we can see that. And the other thing is, it says that the two major reservoirs are 2.2 and 2.5 miles. And is that the size of the reservoir or the miles away? Because you keep referring to 1 mile away, but then on the map it says 2.2 and 2.5. That's just a question. Sorry, I'm throwing a lot at you at once. And then you keep speaking about a dam inspection. Which dam? Because I know in this process, 2 dams will be affected. One is the dam in town, and the other is the Willow Mill Dam. So which one are you referring to, and how will the Willow Dam be affected? And then you speak about ideas way down the road in terms of reuse of the land, the landfill, not the landfill, the dump site. And my question is, if it were to be reused, if there were a leak in the membrane, hopefully not, then how would one access that area if there were solar panels or whatever on top, or another building or whatever your comes about? My understanding, just in my research, is that the site is under contract but not been bought yet by GE. That's my understanding. Just and then I'm trying to read the large document with comments, trying to find my comments. I spoke, thank you to, I can't find her in here, but to the person, to Kelsey in Boston, but I did not find, and I'll look again, but the changes that were actually made in response to comments. So if that could somehow, again, I'll call her, and I'd love to see that. Thank you very much.
Great.
Some of those, I'd appreciate it.
Great question. So
I'll take a shot at it, Patrick. I'll take a shot at transportation and then air monitoring. Maybe Dean can do the miles from the landfill and the dam stuff, reuse of the landfill. I'll try that too. So I'll start, and then Dean can jump in, or maybe even Tim Conway or John. Transportation, yes, we will. You know, that's going to be something that clearly we want the public's input on. In particular, we want the people that live around there to be totally involved in that, and with the goal of reducing the impacts to those people, hopefully down to nothing. But you know, we're going to do the best we can to keep the trucks away from the residential properties. But obviously, there will be time there once you get out on certain main roads. That's going to be impossible. But when we're talking about if there are other ways into this area, we know the gravel pit has many accesses to it, some that are finished now and some that aren't. So we'll be looking at all those things to try and reduce impacts. In terms of the air monitoring, we intend to do air monitoring before, during, and after we build anything, and during the work that is going on in the river itself. We're going to be working right next to residential properties in some cases, and we're going to want to be monitoring the air while we're taking PCBs out of the river. That's going to be the worst case scenario for PCB volatilization, or even worse, probably dust. If you have dust going into the air, that may have even higher levels of PCBs than volatilizing themselves. So that's when we're going to want to monitor very closely. We're used to doing that at many sites. And, you know, we've shut down sites and fixed things when we felt like things, you know, there was too much dust in the air or whatever. So that is something that's going to be monitored very closely. In terms of the reuse of the landfill and the fixes, I think, you know, again, when we look at the way this thing is being built, we don't expect that, you know, both layers of the liner are going to fail, and you know, but even if you did have a leak in the landfill, the question is what would be leaking. It's likely to be very, very low contaminated water. Again, if the PCBs came out of the sediments so easily, we wouldn't have them in the river right now. They would be in Long Island Sound. So we monitor. If we ended up finding that there were PCBs in the water coming out of the landfill, then we would have to take an action in the water, you know, dealing with the groundwater. We deal with lots of landfills across New England and across the country where the landfills are unlined, so we expect some releases to come out of them, and we take action, you know, in the perimeter of the landfill. For example, there are certain landfills where we pump the groundwater and treat it and then pump it back to, you know, the clean location again. So there are all kinds of things that you can do to fix a problem like that. Again, this is a situation where we have very low levels of contaminants in the first place, even lower levels if water was ever to come out of it. So, you know, it's not a release is not a catastrophic release. It's something that we think we could fix or deal with if it were to happen. We don't expect it to happen again. And on the, we'll figure out how to get something to the CCC and others on the response to comments thing, exactly where that is. We think, go ahead, John, if you can add to that.
Yeah, Brian, it's, if you look at in a long response to comments document, it's attached at the very back. Attachment A has the list of changes from the draft 20 revised permit to what we issued in December. And also for people's information, so that's attachment A. Attachments B and C also list people who commented and give the sections of our response to comments where those comments are addressed. So if you want to see where your comments are addressed, you can look at attachments B and C.
Great, thanks, John. Brian, did we want Dean to cover the mileage?
The dam thing and the miles, just to make sure we're clear on how far the landfill is from these locations.
All right, sorry, this is Dean Tagliaferro, the EPA project manager. Hopefully the screen is back up. So a couple things. The distance here, I'm going to try and blow this up, so I apologize. To clarify, it's 1.1 or 1.2 miles. I think you might have said 2, but it's 1.1 or 1.2 miles from the disposal area to the surface water protection zones. So that's what that is. And this here is the actual intake. So the actual intake's a little bit farther, but it's 1.1 or 1.2 miles. As far as the river, yeah, I'm very sorry about that. The river, here's Woods Pond to the north, and it flows down on this side and then kind of gets very thin or disappears.
Yeah, if you could change, that would be helpful so that you can access wherever it is.
All right, if we do more presentations or more fact sheets, we will definitely do that. The dams, there's several dams. There's Woods Pond right here, the Woods Pond Dam. That's owned by GE, and they need to inspect, monitor, and maintain it. There's another one that is owned by GE called Rising Pond Dam in Housatonic in Great Barrington.
Right.
So that is also owned, inspected, and monitored by GE. You mentioned another one, Willow Mill Dam, I believe. That is for the Onyx Paper Company. So they maintain it. GE does have an obligation in the revised permit to work with existing dam owners to make sure that proper maintenance is being done. So that applies to, there's 3 other dams that GE doesn't own. One of them is Columbia Mill Dam, which under this permit, GE is required to remove. So that would eliminate any maintenance issues there. The Willow Mill Dam, excuse me, is the second one. And there's a third one, I think it's called the Glendale Dam. It generates power. So GE is also obligated under this permit to reach an agreement with Glendale to monitor that dam as well.
Thank you. There's a question from Reed I want to get to. So what level of dust would cause EPA to shut down work as you were doing the dredging and moving? And what happens then? Is there a protocol, say, if there's dust remediation for people's property?
Yeah, those plans would all be part of the designs for each individual part of the cleanup. So that would be something that people could actually comment on as well. But there would be some particulate standard that would, that we'd look at for constant monitoring, and then we do other PCB monitoring as well. So I can't answer the exact. I mean, we've had pretty consistent levels at sites that we've dealt with across New England in terms of what would trigger action. And then if we triggered action, we would stop. We would either stop the work, we would immediately, change the protocols that were going on to make sure that there wasn't a problem. We've had sites where the levels of contaminants have been really, really high and unexpectedly high. So we just shut down the site, put foam on the area to make sure that there's no volatilization or whatever, and then rethink what we're doing. I don't think we'd be in that situation here because the levels are a lot lower overall, but we definitely want to always keep the dust down. You want to keep the dust down to almost nothing. You keep things wet. It's easy in the river when everything's wet anyway. As we get out into the floodplain, that's where we have to be more careful. But we're pretty used to dealing with these kinds of things. And again, these are all the specific numbers and the protocols. Everything will be in a plan that G will propose to us. We'll, show to the public and show to everyone here. And then EPA will ultimately say what the standard is based on all that input that we get from others. Does that answer your question, Reed?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, you know where I am. I mean, I'm looking down at the dam from my bedroom window, and where I can also see the two bald eagles there. And it's, I'm right here. I'm at ground zero. So I want to make sure that if things are hairy and bigger levels than you think, I don't know what it means that you'd cover my house in foam to make sure the dust is.
Yeah, we would get to the problem before the dust got to your house. I can tell you that. But when we're working in a dredging kind of situation, it's a little different because everything's already wet. And we wouldn't want to keep material on it. Like, let's say we're using a barge or something. You wouldn't want to keep it on a barge too long, so it would dry out. So you'd want to move it quickly. Quickly meaning that day you want to get rid of that material so that it's not sitting around. But there's all kinds of protocols to make sure, and we wouldn't, there wouldn't be a situation where there's so much dust that we would have. We would have dealt with it by then. We're going to have people on site watching this work going on.
I'm aware of the time, and we're beginning to come to a close. But Brian, I wonder, I know on the GE Hudson site, there were kind of health and safety standards for like PCB volatilization at a certain air quality level. They would shut the operation down to check, or there were quality of life standards around like noise and traffic. Are there be kind of similar things ultimately for this site as well during construction?
The short answer is yes. There's all those same kind of plans here that would be put in place. And again, everyone's going to get a chance to review those.
Yeah, this is Dean. Just adding to that, there will be new plans, but there's existing plans that we use for the 22 cleanups in Pittsfield, and for particulates and PCBs in air, which measures both the volatilized PCBs and PCBs absorbed to particulates. We have two levels. We have the notification level where GE has to notify us right away. And then we have the action level, and like Brian said, they're all going to be written down and reviewed. And if they exceed the action level, they've got to immediately cease work unless it's just unsafe to do so, in which case they kind of wrap things up and make it safe. And then we evaluate the situation with GE, look at engineering controls, what can be done differently. So we definitely have those. Those already exist. They could change for the rest of the river, but those plans do exist. We did not have any exceedances of those in the 1.5 mile reach. Just a little bit at Silver Lake, which was extremely contaminated sediment. We did have some higher levels of PCBs in the air right at the lake, and we did shut down and reevaluate it. And like Brian said, what we should have done better, and we corrected it immediately, was GE was dredging and pulling out cars and other debris so that they could cap the lake bottom and put it on the barge. And GE did not cover the barge on a given day, and it was a hot day in the high level. So that's an example where they did shut down, we reevaluated, changed operations, and it went much better after that.
And we have kind of one last question for the night, maybe. The foam issue, Brian raised the question of what kind of foam. So
we would have to look at that. I know there's concern now with foams with another chemical, which we don't want to introduce.
It wasn't perfluorinated compounds in the foams, I can tell you that. Which is that's what we're dealing with in the firefighting foams all over New England and all over the country now, in particular in New England, only because we're looking for it and no one else in the country is. But yeah, it's sort of inert foams, and the only it's not creating a chemical reaction with the contaminant. It's more just a blanket to cover them for the short term, so that then you can reevaluate it again. When you're dealing with stuff like that, you're talking hundreds of thousands of parts per million PCBs or whatever, or some other compound that volatilizes even more than PCBs. So, but the point is we're used to dealing with those things and looking at them and fixing them. This is a much lesser concern, but we'll still be concerned. We'll still be dealing with it.
Right.
Patrick, I was thinking that maybe we could, I know it's 8 o'clock, but maybe we can, I want the public to have a chance to ask a few more questions if we can. I'm willing, if others are willing, I'm willing to stay until maybe 8:30 at the latest, but is that okay with everyone?
Yeah. Let me just check, and if there are other, I don't see any hands up right now, but if there are other hands up either for the CCC or for public attendees, Brian's offering to try to answer questions. So let's see, I think I've got Robert Jones, you have your hand up, so Cam will unmute you. This is Patrick Field speaking, and facilitator for the CCC. And okay, Robert, unmute yourself and you should be good. Okay, go for it.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I can hear you, sir.
Thank you. My name is Bob Jones. I'm a representative of District 2 in Lee, Massachusetts. I was appointed back in September, largely because of the PCB dump issue, and because of the disagreement we're having in Lee these days. I don't want to get into a debate about the science of the dump or any of the work that's been done thus far. In fact, I'd like to commend all of you for the hard work that you've done. I can see that you're all very bright and dedicated people, and I believe that you believe that you're doing the right thing. I also am a chairman of a group called Citizens Against the PCB Dump, and we are going into litigation with the Board of Selectmen in Lee, while HRI, Housatonic River Initiative, is going into litigation with the EPA. And I hate to, I really don't want to rain on anybody's parade, but the problem that we're having thus far, and I'm saying this only to make you aware of the situation. The problem that we're having is the citizens of Lee do not want a dump in Lee at Woods Pond, nor do we want a dump anywhere else in the Berkshires. We believe that the whole process was flawed. The Board of Selectmen in Lee had no right to make a decision. 3 people actually made the decision, while only 1 attended the actual negotiations. 3 people made a decision for a town of 6,000 people that there was going to be a PCB dump in a neighborhood in Lee. And I'm not going to take a lot of time, but I don't know how many of you live within a mile of the proposed site. I know certainly that the other select boards or their representatives or anybody in Pittsfield lives within a mile of the proposed site. And unfortunately, the town of Lee, the citizens of Lee, the voters of Lee, did not have a say in this process. And again, the hair stands up on the back of my neck when I think of the work that you folks have done to try to make this a viable site. I know you believe that this is the right thing, but I can tell you factually, the people of Lee do not want a dump in their town. And I don't think that the people of Sheffield, Great Barrington, Stockbridge, Lenox, Pittsfield, none of them want a dump in their town either. Somehow it got foisted on Lee. So we're going into litigation, but I came in not to in any way preach to you. And again, I really appreciate the hard work you've put in. But the people of Lee are not going to stand for this, and we're going into litigation. It's going to be on the town warrant. We're going to spell it out overwhelmingly. It can't happen. So I apologize for bringing this bad news to you, but and I appreciate the work that you've done. But I just thought, out of respect to you and for you, that you should know this, and that we're very, very serious about it. And again, the process was flawed, and I'm sorry that anybody had the idea that this dump should go into Lee, because we're going to see that it doesn't happen. With that, thank you very much for hearing me.
Robert, thank you. Appreciate the comments. Claire, I think you're up next, and we'll unmute you. I just want to see if the mic shows up. And then Claire, if you unmute yourself, you should be good.
Okay.
Okay, good.
I'm just curious how long the Citizens Coordinating Council has been in existence. Are these people that I see now part of the Citizens Coordinating Council, including you? Patrick, I've never quite understood what part they played in this whole process. I don't recall them being at the first meeting I ever went to, which was an informational meeting at Lenox High School several years ago. But I think I wandered into a meeting where at the Lenox Library, which I thought was a hearing on the PCB situation. And I saw Timmy there, Timmy Gray, and I saw Tim Conway. I know those people, but I don't know who all these others are. I know Kelsey, Brian, of course, and I see some acronyms. Is that the word? Initials after some of the names, but I don't know who they represent, and I'd like to know.
Nope, that's great. So Kelsey, I'm going to turn this over to you for a little bit of kind of who's on the CCC, what its role is. And Claire, my name's Patrick Field. I work for a group called the Consensus Building Institute, or CBI. We're based in Cambridge, Mass. And we've been facilitating, we're an independent, nonprofit, facilitating the CCC for several years. I can't quite remember when we started, but there was previous facilitators, and the CCC has been around much longer than us. But Kelsey, let me turn over to you to talk a little bit about the CCC and its membership and role.
Sure. Thanks. And hi, Claire. I know we've spoken recently. It's nice to hear you again. So as Patrick said, CBI is the Consensus Building Institute. They are a contractor that's working for EPA and has been facilitating the CCC meetings. And, in fact, I'm the newest EPA staff person that's working on this site. Everyone else has been here much longer, so could probably speak better to this. But the group was formed and is essentially a community group that does have a body of individuals who sit at the table. Some of the members are just residents in the area. Some are state officials who work with the state of Connecticut and Massachusetts. We have Massachusetts Audubon is on there, a few other environmental entities, community groups that you're aware of, BEAT and HEAL and HRI. And then we have other alternate members and just members of the public who are included in some of the information that I distribute out. That I believe, I apologize, I know you'd given me your email, so I'll make sure that you do get added to that list. So the CCC meets quarterly. We have agenda items that are developed based on the activities ongoing at the site. And more recently, in the past several years, actually, the topic has been the general permit that EPA has been working on and recently issued. So the EPA team that's on here is myself, Brian Olson, Tim Conway, and John Kilborn, who are both attorneys, Dean Taliaferro, who's the main project manager, and Bob Chincharulo. So that's just a general overview. If anybody else from the team wants to add, feel free to, or Claire, if you have a follow-up.
A few things to follow up and see if there are others. I think we have representatives from both Connecticut, where the Connecticut is also affected, as well as Massachusetts. And many of these folks have been incredibly committed with their volunteer time, as Brian referred to earlier, for really decades, remarkably committed. And the CCC advises, listens, informs, cajoles, argues with the EPA. It doesn't necessarily agree with the decisions EPA makes, including this one around the landfill. But it is a robust, vigorous process for people to engage, to do the best they can to advise EPA as it moves forward. And it has definitely been working for quite some time. But if anybody else wants to add to that, please do.
And there is an official a write-up kind of summarizing the CCC's roles, responsibilities, and relationship with EPA, which I know is on our webpage. I don't have in front of me, but we could certainly share that with you too.
These people of the CCC are not the stakeholders, though some are the stakeholders that I see here at the negotiations. So did these people that are part of the CCC, were they sitting at the table for the negotiation?
Yes. So the meeting that you came into Lenox Library, that's where we've been holding the CCC meetings. The members typically sit around that, either U-shape or circular table that we're seated at. And then the members of the public would have been seated where you walked in there in the kind of more stadium seating, so to speak, in the chairs. And that was the CCC meeting. That was not a public hearing.
Claire, this is Brian. To answer your question on the negotiations, there were people from each town assigned to the CCC over time, and those people have changed over time. But there may have been at least one person that I can think of there's an overlap between someone that might have been sitting on the CC and also had a different role in the town where they were involved in the negotiations. So that is certainly possible, but those people were involved at the direction of the towns for, like I think, I don't know, like maybe Benno was the representative at one point. I don't think he still is, for the town of Sheffield. And so it's just changed over time, and there's been different representatives from different towns, having nothing to do with the negotiations themselves.
Right. So Claire, the CCC didn't sit as a kind of official body in the mediation or the negotiation. It was separate and distinct from that. Jane, did you want to remark? And just go off mute there.
I just want to point out that the people who were involved with the settlement are the people who appealed EPA's first permit in 2016 and disagreed with it. That's how we ended up being a part of that settlement.
So all the stakeholders were part of the appeal.
The people who appealed the permit were the ones who were involved with the whole negotiation.
And can we name who those people are? Or is that confidential? I don't.
No, we can name them.
Okay.
Some people are here. We have BEAT. We have Mass Audubon, HRI. We had the members of the towns. The whole group of towns appealed the permit. We had Jeffrey Cook, who appealed the permit. City of Pittsfield,
State of Connecticut.
State of Connecticut.
And General Electric.
And GE was obviously part of it too. So anyone who appealed that 2016 permit was part of that negotiation process because the intent was to resolve all of those appeals, which obviously were coming from different sides. GE appealed for one reason and everyone else, almost everyone else, was appealing for a different reason.
Okay, I had the impression that the appeal was simply about shipping the PCBs out of state.
No.
And that GE had objected to doing that, and therefore we went into negotiations to see if that could be settled.
Claire, there were lots of appeals that related to the environmental cleanup as well, and that's why within the negotiations there were several enhancements to the cleanup, which the people that appealed for that reason, that's what they, that's what all those people were pushing for in the negotiation. So it was both sides, all sides.
Claire, I just want to get Ann in if that's okay. Is that all right?
I didn't know that. I really thought when the federal mediator was there at the original meeting I went to, that we were just adjourning to settle this. Where is the dump going to be? There was nobody else at that meeting who was from anywhere else except I think Lee and Lennox. So I really did not understand when I left that meeting that all these other parties were involved. That wasn't clearly explained to us at that meeting. And I've been kind of wondering why the rest of the river is benefiting Pittsfield to perhaps a much greater extent than it is the rest of the river, Lee, Lennox, Great Barrington, Sheffield, all the way down Connecticut. So that this has been confusing. I don't know what weight that carries, not in a sense, I'm not thinking in a legal sense, I'm just explaining to you that it was difficult to understand just what was that meeting about when the federal mediator came in. And we all walked away with the feeling that people were going to be appointed to that negotiating group. I don't think we understood that there were a lot of other stakeholders in this that weren't at that meeting. So this was quite a shock. I guess that's why it was quite a shock when the dump was placed in Lee, because it seemed like the other interest groups got what they needed. They got what they needed. The cleanup of the wetlands from Pittsfield to Woods Pond. The Audubon Society cleanup of Canoe Rivers, Canoe Meadows. The GE buildings that were never cleaned up properly. All those issues were resolved. And we get left with the dump. I don't understand why there wasn't a bigger voice for not wanting the dump and putting that pressure on GE to get rid of this, get it out of the country, out of the county, out of the county. It's in my backyard, guys. And I know it's not supposed to leak, but the other dumps that are behind us have leaked. In fact, leaked right down into the brook that goes beside my house. I realize that this other dump is further away, but it was the Schweitzer Mill, Kimberly Clark Mill. I have found in the records that did leak. and it leaked for probably 6 or 7 months, and I was never notified by the Department of Environmental Protection that there was a leak and that it was going by my house. And I soaked my horse after every ride in that brook. And you know, he was a championship horse. And at 8 years old, he developed navicular disease. And this is what I would do, would go ride all over October Mountain, getting ready for 35 and 50-mile rides. And I'd come back and soak my horse in the brook beside my house. And I look back at the dates when the leak was 83 and 84 and 85. And it was going on and I was never told. I think things have changed since then. I believe that we would be notified if something was going on. But the fact that there was that I never really had thought about the fact that it could have been something that there was no reason for this horse to develop that. Plus, my husband having COPD and me having had 2 bladder cancers, and my mother-in-law who lived in this house dying of lung cancer. I really never suspected PCBs as having anything to do with my horse until it wasn't PCBs, it was volatile, very toxic chemicals that were leaking from the Kimberly-Clark mill. They were chemicals that were used in film processing. And I just found this out last week. And I looked at it and I thought, oh my God, that's the horse that was 7th in New England in competitive riding. And he was so fit. Farriers were amazed that he had developed this disease. So, you know, I trust you, Brian, more than I trust Kimberly-Clark, but I know where we sit, the Upland disposal facility, even though it's further away than the Kimberly-Clark and the town landfill, which also got overflow from the Schweitzer dump, it's also polluted. And they bought that land next to Mrs. Schaefer because they knew that there was a chance of that dam, that landfill leaking down into her campground there. So there's a history there.
We get Ann in as well, so I really appreciate the comments and the
okay. So meanwhile, the Upland disposal facility will be above my house still, and that aquifer comes right down to my house. Thank you.
Claire, thank you, and thanks for sharing
Claire.
this story. Really appreciate it. I'm very sorry for your horse, Chip. It was a beautiful animal. Let me turn to Ann, who had her hand up, and that's probably our last comment of the night. And Ann, I think, go ahead and speak so we can hear you.
Am I unmuted? You can hear me well?
We can hear you well. Thank you. Go forth.
First, I just wanted to ask Patrick if this is being recorded so that we can share it with other people.
Yes, it's being recorded. We're going to make it available to the local cable station. And I don't know if we posted anywhere else, EPA, but I know we'll make it available to the local cable channel.
Okay. Just because I'm not able to see Dean, is there a reason why we cannot see Dean's face?
Ask Dean about his camera. I don't know.
Yeah, I somehow messed up my camera today trying to get it on. It just wouldn't work, so I apologize.
That's okay. I just wasn't sure if it was on my end or.
No, it's me.
Okay. So I had a couple questions. So I was curious to know if either Tim Conway or Bob Chingarillo, if they were either involved with the negotiations through the executive sessions.
Yes, we both were.
Right from the beginning?
Yes, yeah, right from the beginning.
Okay, and I also wanted to ask Brian Olson and Dean, how many other dumps similar to this with the PCBs have both of you worked on over the years?
They're all different, obviously. You know, there's not one that's exactly like the other, but I can tell you that on almost every site, big site at least, that I've worked on in New England.
Do you consider ours a big site or a small site?
We have, I would consider this a big site, yeah, really big site. Material is consolidated on site. You know, there aren't many sites that we ship a lot of material off-site. We don't, you know, you're generally just moving it from one place to the other, to someone else's community when you do that. So usually there's some kind of consolidation like this. Sometimes we have liners in place and caps and everything. Sometimes the levels are low enough that we don't have any liners or caps.
I think you mistook my question. I was only asking how many of these other dumps have you helped in working with and creating?
Yeah, I think I was saying that, well, we have 130 Superfund sites in New England, and there's many, many of them that have consolidation on the sites. That was my answer.
Right, but how many have you personally been involved with? All 130?
Between me, Bob, and Dean, probably close to all of them.
And Dean, how many of these have you been the project manager of?
The first 15 years of my career were in a different program. It was more of a short-term cleanup emergency response program. So we would, typically those projects would last, you know, from a day to 1 or 2 months. So not in that part. And since 1998, I've been working exclusively on this site, the General Electric site. And probably 50% of the waste removed, that might not be an exact percentage, in the 22 cleanups in Pittsfield were consolidated in Pittsfield, one of them with an existing unlined landfill for material that has concentrations that would go in this UDF, which is double line. So the similar material that is allowed to go in this double line landfill went in an unlined landfill in Pittsfield, and the second landfill was created with a bottom liner for waste that this permit is requiring to go off-site. So that was 250,000 cubic yards that I oversaw being consolidated in Pittsfield.
Okay. And my other part question to that is there a list on EPA's website of where these other dumps that you say there's 130 total-ish? Are there a list of other dump sites that have been created that we as residents can look at and see history on, as far as you know, when they were built, how long they've been in place, if there were issues with similar things that we're dealing with residential complaints in Lee? Is there some place on EPA's website where we can find that information?
Ryan, can you speak?
Yeah, so so if you're looking at ones that are similar to this, that would mean that they're double lined, leachate detection, caps. Those are mainly commercial landfills. So there is information on EPA's website on those, and you know what, I don't know exactly what the information is, but there's lots of information on all the commercial landfills. And then there are several Superfund sites that would have sort of the double liner leachate detection that we have here. Again, those other sites are mostly built for much higher levels of contamination, and we're not allowing that to happen here. So they're not really comparable, but you could see in a much worse situation how those landfills have operated.
Right, but I mean, is there a master list that anybody can reference to, or is there a map that, you know, has red dots and shows where all of these are across the country?
Kelsey or somebody, can you speak to kind of access to EPA's website and whether there is that kind of asking?
So there is not a list of just sites that have landfills. It's not classified as such. There is a list of all of the Superfund sites around New England, the 20 some odd that Brian mentioned, and then nationally as well. I could certainly talk, we could talk more about other sites that have landfills, but as Brian mentioned, almost all of them that dispose of materials do involve some landfill. So I'm not sure if there's any, more particular breakdown that you'd be interested in, but there is not a list of sites that have landfills broken down as that. We could certainly try and break them down and find some. I don't think it would be effective to go through and list every site where materials disposed of in a landfill, because most of them do have some of that material ongoing.
And there is, just to be clear, there is a list on EPA's website of all the PCB TSCA landfills across the country that are commercial landfills that are, for the most part, built like this one, but much higher levels. And it would be the same material that's being sent off-site for this particular, for this particular site. All the high-level materials is going to these others landfills that are built much like this one to other.
All right,
other
great
communities.
information, Brian. That's what I was hunting for. Thank you.
And John Kilbourne, EPA attorney, also look at the response to comments, page 12, the middle paragraph has our information that we discussed about other our experience with caps that are similar, and there's a table, there's a reference to a list in that paragraph also. So,
okay, and then I just had one last question, and that is for let's see, Brian, Dean, Tim Conway, and Bob, and then there's one other gentleman from I think his name is John.
Yeah, John Kilbourne you might be referring to. I'm not sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Is he with EPA? Was that?
Yes.
Okay. So of you five that work with EPA and do these dump sites in towns, do any one of you five live within 3 miles of any of these PCB dump sites that you have helped create across the New England counties?
This is Dean. I might live within 3 miles of the Allendale School one. I haven't really mapped it out, but I do live in Pittsfield. My kids played on that field. They played on the soccer field. They played on the baseball fields, which are 50 feet away. When my daughter was born, she was in a stroller. I had her out there watching my other boys practice during the disposal, not even after when it was capped, and I have zero concerns about having them out there as long as they were. Like I said, I don't know my distance. I know my mother and father were born within 100 feet of the GE facility. As far as exposure to PCBs, all of my relatives worked at GE. And if you want to talk about exposure to PCBs, that's where you got it. That's where my health concerns would be. So I have zero concern with the landfill at GE, and I don't have any concerns long-term for this landfill.
Okay, what about the other four? Do any of you have any experience living close to any of the PCB dump sites that have been put in over the years?
This is Tim. I don't.
I definitely live within, I think I haven't mapped it out, but I live within 3 miles of one of our Superfund sites where there's significant consolidation of waste. It's called Norwood PCBs. And yeah, I don't know the exact distance, but pretty close to that.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I agree with Dean, and we can't stress this enough. We are concerned about the PCBs in the uncontrolled environment in the river. Again, 25% of those PCBs that are coming out of the river have been sitting in Woods Pond for the past 75 years. We're concerned about that. We want to get them out, and we want to put them in a safe place. So that, again, I would have zero concerns about reusing this landfill once it's done. Having my kids go there or whatever to reuse the top of the landfill. There is going to be no exposure once it's done. There is exposure right now going on in the river itself, and that's why we need to do something.
And what about the other two gentlemen that didn't speak? Do either of you have any experience living close to any of these PCB dump sites?
John or Bob, and then let's begin to wrap up. John?
No, I don't live near a PCB dump. I live, I think, fairly close to the Wells G&H Superfund site and Industrialplex Superfund site.
And Bob?
And then Bob?
Yeah, again, not necessarily close to a Superfund site. I live probably 4 or 5 miles from a town landfill. I do live close to a river, and just sort of echoing what Brian said. I think if that river were contaminated with PCBs, I think I would see the sort of the fair trade of getting those PCBs out of the environment and into a secure location like this upland disposal facility.
Well, I don't myself I live in Lee, but I am probably a little over 3 miles from the proposed site, but I still care about my neighbors and the environment. So, that my concern is for the health aspects for my neighbors who do live over there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ann. I will say that, we have those same concerns as you do about the environment, about the kids. A lot of people on this have heard me say this before. I grew up in Woburn, Mass, where, several of my friends got leukemia as a result of drinking the water in Woburn. And so I take this stuff really, really seriously, and I would never put this community into a situation of potentially harming them. We could, there can be a difference of opinion on that, but we feel really strongly from our technical standpoint that there is will be no exposure once this is done. There's exposure going on right now, and there won't be when we're done.
There definitely is.
I'm aware of the time, and I know Audrey from the CCC has her hand up, so I want to turn to her last, and then I do want to begin to close the meeting. It's at a late hour. So Audrey?
I just wanted to make some clarification for some people who are speaking. The reason so many people are upset is the process and how this happened. There was never, ever a public discussion of a landfill being built in Lee or being developed in Lee. And when people went into the mediation process, there were public officials who promised. I remember there was one who, she quoted herself in saying, this would be built over my dead body. And so when the settlement was announced, people were in shock because they didn't have a say. This is all about public participation. We've been here. I think the CCC has been going on since 2002 or 2003, if I remember. I think there are notes going back to then. We show up at these meetings, and Heel was asked to participate in the mediation. We were very uncomfortable because we were told we couldn't discuss it with the public or our membership. And we really felt that I'm not saying I'm opposed, aren't opposed to any compromise. We're opposed to the fact that you would not permit the public to have a say in the settlement or compromise. And that's why people are furious. I can agree with everything that was said here, but I cannot agree on the process of how this occurred and what were done to the communities in Berkshire County on how this was really imposed upon them without them having a say, without them saying, okay, we can agree with this compromise, because they had a say in it somewhere along the line, either in town votes or all the towns had public hearings. This is why there is this fury to this. I agree with all the nice things that Brian and Dean and everyone has said. Everyone, being near the communities and living there, and it's okay to have a landfill. But the point is, you did not ask the communities if they agree on the compromise. And we, as our organizations, we were not permitted to go to our membership and say, okay, is this settlement okay? We were supposed to represent them without asking them. And it's the process that we had a really, really difficult time. And we felt that we would betray our communities. And that's why these communities feel betrayed, is because they really felt they were misled about the building of a landfill, whether it be in Lee or Rising Pond or whatever. And that's why there's this underbelly of fury about what is being imposed upon Berkshire County without the consent, not of the public officials behind doors agreeing to something which they promised they would never agree to in the first place. I just want to explain that I think Claire was trying to ask that question. Thank you.
You're on mute, Patrick.
I am. I keep trying. There we go. Audrey, thank you. I think that kind of clarified and kind of summed up, I think, some of the underlying concerns very succinctly. I want to, I think being to close the CCC meeting, appreciate people's comments, both the CCC members and the public. A number of issues for the CCC in future meetings to address that we named tonight, some process pieces to tend to, and again, I understandably some very strong concern from folks, near and around the proposed landfill in terms of expressed tonight. Brian, any final words before we close for the evening?
No, just thank you for everyone, and again, thank you for all the advocates for the environment that are out there. Again, it's okay for us to disagree. I just want to again thank everyone for all the time they put into this. It's really an important issue. It's an important issue for EPA. I know there's not complete agreement and some real disagreement, but still we're all working towards the same goal here.
Great. All right. And CCC members will be in touch about future meetings and the like. And for those folks who want to make sure they're on email list, again, they can email Kelsey. And for a few folks who asked, I also provided my email list too to make sure you're on future notifications. Thank you, everyone. Be well, be safe. Appreciate the commitment tonight. And we hope to see you soon. Thanks all. Bye.
Thanks, Patrick.
Right.
Well, good night. There's two beans.
Elizabeth, just quickly, could you follow up? Did you have Benno's phone number?
Yeah.
Okay, so definitely follow up with him.
Yeah.
If you could in the next day or two and just explain the situation. Certainly if he has concerns, we'll raise it to the EPA, but just explain what happened because I couldn't get to him in a private chat, so I couldn't say anything very clear.
Yeah.
Okay, that would be great.
Yeah, I tried to reach him and didn't want to leave a substantive voicemail, so but we never connected.
Did you actually leave a voicemail for him though? Just a short one?
I think so.
Okay, all right. Just try to reach him in the next few days.
I just sent an email.
Yeah. Okay, that'd be good. All right.
Thanks for late, Kim.
No problem.
Thank you. All right. I was ready to end it at 8, but Brian wanted to keep going, so.
Well, I understand why he did.
All right. Thank you all.
Okay. Good night.